This is Ash Wednesday. And for many of you who have gone through ceremonies, whether they're drive through or if they're sitting in community worshiping, today is the day when you get ashes on your head and you are told you are dust and to dust you shall return, which is kind of ominous. And why do we do that even in the beginning of Lent? Because this is the beginning of Lent. This is the beginning of some of the oldest celebrations in the Christian church. People right back in the first centuries realized they needed a time to kind of prepare themselves as they reenacted and relived what had happened to Christ in his final days and his death and resurrection. And Lent was a time also when the students learned what it meant to be this faith of ours. And this faith of ours is not one of just confession. This faith of ours is action. Christianity is lived faith. It's a practice. It's not something you say, well, I'm Christian, and just sit out all the social issues of life. You can't do that. That's just a word then. It doesn't have any meaning. Even the first century understood that we needed to do something to kind of bring our understanding of what it meant to be Christian all together. And what it means to be Christian is essentially having two walks. One is the social justice walk, making it better. The other walk is the internal spiritual walk of walking with God, believing in the resurrection, seeing our part in the whole process. What we are not called to do, however, is to dominate the culture and to make our way of doing things the only way that's acceptable, or a version of our way as the only way acceptable. That's actually heretical. And that is not what being a Christian is about. And on this Ash Wednesday in 2023, we're called again to refocus and find that place. The readings this week are from Matthew, and they are outlining what we now know in the church as the pillars of Lent. So getting back to the whole ashes and ashes thing, even to update that, it might be about saying we were once atoms and particles and we'll return to being atoms and particles. We're part of the universe. We are part of the glory. We're not something that just gets tossed out. That came later with understanding of ashes, but ashes were something that built things. They were needed in various household items. They were not useless things, but they were tiny particles that until they were formed in God's image didn't really matter a whole lot. You are in God's image. We all are. And while we might return to particles, we might have come from particles, right now we're here. Right now we're doing the work. Ash Wednesday is also a time for us to have confession, that we have not done what we have promised to do. We have not lived the vows that were taken on our behalf at our baptism, or if we were baptized earlier, or later rather in life, that we have not continued those vows. We haven't necessarily continued the vows of those of us who've gone through confirmation and said, yes, I will honor the vows made on my behalf as a baby. It's an opportunity for us to rejig. That's what Lent is. It's an opportunity to take a really good look at those two walks, the social justice walk and the spiritual walk. Are we doing what we need to do to be proper followers of Christ? So we have an opportunity today to restart that journey. Our reading in Matthew talks about, first of all, if you're going to pray. And then there's giving alms. And then there is fasting. And not necessarily in that order. But they talk about the three things that have basically come to be the pillars of Lent. And all of them, Jesus says, don't do it with boasting. Don't do it to get attention. Don't do it to show everybody how great you are, because that defeats the purpose. That is not what your spiritual walk is about. We're not here to show up anybody. We are here to be honest in our faith and in our journey. So if we're going to be giving money, if we're going to be giving from ourselves, and some of us can't afford money, we can only afford time, and that's okay too. But if we're going to be giving, we just give. Don't make a big fuss about it. Don't do a whole look at me. Just give quietly, because that's all we're asked to do. And when we're in prayer, don't stand up and make these grand pronouncements or stand in street corners and make everybody look at you. That's not the way to do it. When you pray, go in a room, close the door, Pray very quietly and talk to God. In the scripture, we've got a gap, if you notice, between 6 and then when it picks up again. In that, we have Matthew's version of what is traditionally known as the Lord's Prayer said. And it starts, and Jesus says, pray like this prayer. And he starts with saying Abba. In Aramaic, it would have been life giver. Not father, life giver. So any language, mother, caregiver, father, any language is completely appropriate. And then it goes on in Aramaic to say, who is everywhere. We've stylized it to say, who art in heaven, but no, God is everywhere. And the early Christians understood that. The ones who spoke Aramaic put that in their words. So that's a prayer that Jesus taught us, but to do it quietly, not with big fanfare, not with people acting out and showing in public how great they are. Now, we're not talking worship. Worship was a gathering of believers that were also done in relative quiet. It was not done in a coliseum necessarily, or someplace big and gathering where you can get attention. It was done in houses and in the back of shops and in gardens, in parks, places where people were gathered quietly together. So God says, when you pray, just do it quietly. Don't draw attention to yourself, because that's not going to get any points anywhere. And thirdly, fasting. Give up some stuff. Now, I was talking with my son yesterday when we were eating our waffles and bacon for Shrove Tuesday, and he was asking why we do this stuff. And I said, well, I mean, the bacon and pancakes, or the sausage and waffles, or whatever combination you have, that's actually picking up on a Jewish tradition. Before Pentecost, they got rid of all of the extra stuff, the fat, the lard, the leaven, everything that wasn't to be part of their Passover feast. They cleaned their house. And, you don't just throw out food, you eat it. So we've developed that into pancakes. And that's why we have these decadent pancakes with syrup or molasses or whatever the day before. Then come Ash Wednesday. It is the time for us to start a form of fasting. And fasting doesn't always have to be about food. It can be about giving up behaviors, giving up things that stand in the way of your spiritual growth, or stand in the way of your health, or stand in the way of something that you want to be. That can be fasting. But again, do it quietly. Don't show the world, oh, look at me, I'm suffering in piety. That's not the way to go about it. In fact, Jesus even says, wash your face, comb your hair, go out in public like it's any other day. Do not let on anybody that you've actually denied yourself something. And the thing with denying food is that everybody had food. It's an equalizer, kind of like with communion, where everybody had had wine and bread. So Jesus used that as the communal meal. When we talk about fasting, everybody can give up food. You know what? If it's even a bread for half a day, the poorest of the poor could give that up for a short period of time as a spiritual discipline. And that's all of these things are. Alms will help others, but it's ultimately about us giving. And this is why we don't do it publicly, because that is a relationship God asks us that we have to practice in God's presence alone. And we're called to pray, not because we need to do this in public to show off how pious we are, but because it's a practice. We have to privately learn how to communicate with God. And sometimes that means us just being quiet and listening for God's voice to be heard. And with time, it can be heard. And it might not be heard as a voice, it might be heard as a feeling or a call to action, but you'll hear that voice. Same with fasting. It's not meant to be something done in public and huge deprivation. It's meant to be a private relationship thing. It's a practice of getting something out of the way. So you're always reminded, especially if you've given up food and you feel hungry, you're always reminded that there is something you're working towards, a relationship with God that you're working towards. These are the basics of Lent. And if you want to put on top of that, if you want to read through a book, or if you want to walk with me, the Lenten series we're going to start next week, we're going to be looking at the Psalms, that's fine too. Pick something that will help you develop your faith. But these 40 days are set aside for us. And they have been right from the beginning of time in our church. They are set aside where we walk the walk and we prepare to have a closer relationship with Jesus. Ash as you might be, atoms and particles you might be. And you will become that again in the end. But right here, right now, on this journey, you are called to be something more. You are called to be God's creation, God's partner, God's co-creator, God's child. That's what Ash Wednesday sets us up for. The ashes just remind us that God chose us, that we are not particularly special outside of our relationship with God, but in that relationship, we have something to offer, something that is incredible that we can give to the world around us. But right now, for Ash Wednesday, for Lent, we have to focus on us and our own development and our own walk. It's just a 6-week period, but it's an opportunity for us to say, Jesus, I'm here. Help me develop my faith further. Because it's that faith that is going to be absolutely essential as we walk through Holy Week in 6 weeks. We need to prepare for that, and we need to go on this journey, looking into ourselves, deepening our relationship with God, and recognizing that when we get to be atoms and particles again, that journey is over. A new journey will begin. But right now, the journey we're on is one of self-awareness with our faith.